I'm Sadie Callahan, and I was 23 years old when I learned two things in the same night. The first was that my grandfather had left me his $30 million beachfront resort in Key West. The second was that the people sitting closest to me in that lawyer's office were already figuring out how to take it away. I remember the way the room changed after my name was read out loud. It was subtle at first, just a shift in posture, a quiet little smile from across the table. The kind people give when they think the real decision still belongs to them. My grandfather had spent his whole life building that resort into something people loved, a place where families came to breathe, celebrate, and feel like life was still beautiful for a few days. And somehow, he had trusted me with all of it. Not the older people in the room, not the ones who thought money and age automatically made them smarter. Me. What none of us understood in that moment was that he had not only left me the resort, he had left behind one final instruction, sealed in a separate envelope, and when the lawyer reached for it, the air in that room went dead still. Because whatever was inside was powerful enough to wipe the smug look off certain faces before a single word was even fully read. Before I tell you what happened after that, tell me where you're listening from and what the weather is like there. I just want to know how far my story can travel. When we got back to the condo in Miami that night, nobody pretended anymore. The polite voices were gone. The careful smiles were gone. It was like that office had been the last place where everybody still felt obligated to act like a family. The second the front door shut behind us, the tone changed. I had barely set my bag down when he pulled out a folder from the kitchen counter like he had been waiting all evening for his real meeting to start. He told me to sit down. Not asked. Told. Then he slid the papers toward me and said it would be smarter for everyone if I signed over temporary management authority while I got settled. He said a resort that size was too complicated for someone my age. That hospitality looked glamorous from the outside but could turn brutal fast. That payroll, insurance, vendor contracts, liquor licensing, and maintenance would bury me within a month. His daughter leaned against the counter with her arms folded, watching me the way people watch a kid about to touch a hot stove after being warned not to. My mother stood off to the side with both hands wrapped around a glass of water, not drinking it, not saying much, just looking tired in a way that made me feel angry and guilty at the same time. I did not even pick up the pen. I just asked one question. If this was really about helping me, why were the papers already prepared before we got home? Nobody answered that directly. He just smiled and said, "Experienced adults plan ahead." Then he told me the arrangement would protect the resort from bad decisions, prevent embarrassing mistakes, and keep the property in responsible hands until I was mature enough to understand what I had inherited. I remember looking down at the signature line and realizing that if I signed those papers, I would spend the rest of my life explaining to myself why I gave away something my grandfather had trusted me to keep. So I pushed the folder back across the counter and said no. I said it calmly, and somehow that made him angrier than if I had yelled. His daughter laughed under her breath and said that was cute. My mother finally spoke, but not the way I wanted her to. She told me I was being emotional and reckless, that nobody was trying to steal anything, that this was what families did when someone young came into serious money. Then she said if I refused to make decisions together, maybe I should learn what independence actually felt like. That was her way of telling me I could not stay there unless I played by their rules. For a second, I honestly thought she would take it back. I thought she would look at me, really look at me, and realize what she was doing. But she did not. She just stared at the floor while his daughter gave me that little shrug people use when they think they have already won. So I went to the guest room, pulled out 2 suitcases, and started packing. Not dramatically, not throwing things, just folding clothes with hands that were shaking harder than I wanted to admit. Every now and then I would stop and think maybe this was insane. Maybe I should wait a day. Maybe grief was making all of us act worse than we meant to. Then I would picture that folder on the counter, already printed, already waiting, and I would keep packing. Around midnight, I loaded my bags into my car and left without asking anybody to come downstairs. Nobody did. The drive to Key West felt longer than any trip I had taken in my life. Not because of the miles, but because I spent the whole night understanding that there is a very specific kind of loneliness that comes from being unwanted the moment you become inconvenient. By the time the sky started lightening over the overseas highway, I had cried, gotten angry, gone numb, and then somehow circled back to steady. My grandfather used to tell me that people revealed themselves fastest when they thought something valuable was within reach. By dawn, I knew exactly what he meant. Horizon Cove came into view just after sunrise, all white stucco and weathered wood and blue trim, with the ocean behind it looking almost too bright to be real. Palm shadows stretched across the driveway. A groundskeeper was already out near the front walk with a hose. Two housekeepers stood near the service entrance talking softly until they saw my car and straightened up. I had been to the resort plenty of times growing up, but arriving there alone with my whole life in the trunk felt completely different. The woman who met me in the lobby was Evelyn Mercer, the operations manager who had worked beside my grandfather for years. She took one look at my face, then at the suitcases behind me, and did not ask me anything embarrassing. She just said, "You look exhausted. Come with me." That kindness almost broke me more than the fight at the condo. She led me into the office behind the front desk, handed me a cup of coffee, and said, "Your grandfather made sure everything legal was airtight. Whatever is happening, you do not have to panic." That was the first time since the reading that I felt my chest loosen. She spent the next hour walking me through the basics: occupancy rates, staffing levels, existing bookings, wedding packages, vendor relationships, deferred maintenance my grandfather had planned to address before he got sick. It was overwhelming, but it was real. Real in a way that made me feel stronger. This was not some fantasy prize. It was a business, a place, a responsibility. And for the first time that night, it actually felt like mine. By noon, I had a room upstairs, a temporary desk in the office, and a legal copy of the ownership documents in my bag. I also had 3 missed calls from a number I recognized, 2 texts I did not open, and 1 voicemail from a man introducing himself as a consultant who said he looked forward to discussing a transition plan for the property. I had not hired a consultant. I had not approved a transition. Standing there with my grandfather's keys in my hand, staring at that voicemail notification, I understood something cold and clear. Leaving Miami had not ended the fight. It had only moved it somewhere they thought I would be easier to isolate. They were wrong. The first few days at Horizon Cove almost fooled me into thinking I could protect everything just by working harder than anyone expected. I threw myself into the job, learning the bookings, the staff, the vendor contracts, and every corner of the resort my grandfather had loved. Evelyn Mercer stayed close, guiding me through the parts I did not know yet, and for a moment the work itself made me feel steady. Then the pressure started showing up in places hard work could not fix. A bakery that had supplied us for years suddenly hesitated to keep working with us because someone hinted there was a management dispute. One of our bartenders got a text from an unknown number warning that smart employees knew when to get on the right side early. The paddleboard shop next door was approached by a man offering to buy out their lease before big changes hit the area. None of it sounded huge on its own, but together it felt deliberate. Evelyn saw it too. She told me people like that never start at the center. They start at the edges. Vendors, neighbors, employees. They make a place feel unstable, then wait for fear to spread. The next morning, Toby Granger from the beach cafe down the road came to see me. He said 2 people had come in claiming they were tied to a future management group connected to the resort. They warned that local businesses might get pushed out and suggested he take an offer now while he still could. He handed me a business card. The name meant nothing to me, but the address traced back to a Miami office connected to one of the holding companies my grandfather had once warned me about. By lunch, Nina Ellis from the kayak shop had her own story. She had received an email that looked official, warning about possible environmental permit reviews and hinting she should consider selling. Evelyn took one look at it and said it was fake. That was when I stopped telling myself this might just be pressure. It was a strategy. I called my mother because I still wanted to believe she did not know how bad it had become. She sounded tired before I even finished explaining. I told her people were circling the resort, contacting local businesses, and sending messages to staff. She did not deny it. She just said I was making things harder than they needed to be. Then she told me I was in over my head and that letting more experienced adults handle the property might be the smart choice. Then I asked her one question. Did he ever mention Tampa? She went silent. That silence told me more than anything else could have. Tampa was real. After the call, Evelyn pulled out the file from my grandfather's attorney. Inside was a memorandum explaining what would happen if anyone tried to challenge my ownership through coercion, fraud, or legal interference. It also confirmed that my grandfather had documented a development scheme in Tampa involving shell companies, false investor materials, and pressure campaigns against waterfront owners. He had seen this pattern before. He had just been waiting to see if it would come for me too. That night, I slept in the manager's apartment above the office with my phone beside me. Around 2 in the morning, another text came in from an unknown number. It said, "This can still be easy if you stop acting like a child." I took a screenshot and saved it. The next morning, my grandfather's attorney called and told me an emergency petition had been filed in Florida seeking temporary oversight of Horizon Cove. Their claim was simple. I was too young, too inexperienced, and too emotionally shaken to manage a $30 million resort responsibly. Suddenly, every strange call, every fake email, and every whisper campaign made sense. They were building a case around me, piece by piece, trying to make the resort look unstable under my control. And standing there in that office, staring out at the water, I finally understood this was no longer a family disagreement. It was a coordinated attempt to take what they believed should never have been mine. By the time the hearing happened, I already knew the outcome had been building for days. The strange calls, the fake emails, the pressure on local businesses, the whispers to my staff. None of it had been random. It was all there to make one argument sound believable when it finally reached a courtroom. I sat beside Miles Whitford in a Florida courthouse and listened while their attorney described me like I was a sentimental kid clinging to a fantasy instead of the legal owner of a $30 million resort. He said Horizon Cove was too valuable, too complex, and too vulnerable to be left in the hands of someone my age who had just lost a close family member. He talked about preserving stability, protecting employees, reassuring vendors, and maintaining public confidence, all with that polished tone people use when they want control to sound like compassion. Miles pushed back hard. He reminded the court that my grandfather had transferred the resort to me intentionally, not accidentally, and that I had already begun managing daily operations. But the other side had done exactly what they meant to do. They had created just enough smoke around the property to make temporary oversight sound reasonable. When the judge granted limited outside supervision while the dispute moved forward, I felt something in my chest go cold and heavy. It was not full ownership, not yet, but it was the opening they had been trying to force. And they knew it. They did not even bother hiding their satisfaction when we stepped outside. By the time I got back to Horizon Cove, Trent Hale and his daughter Sloane were already there. They stood in the lobby dressed like they were arriving for a board meeting, not invading a place they had spent weeks trying to destabilize. Trent had a clipboard tucked under one arm and that same controlled smile he used whenever he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Sloane walked beside him in white slacks and sunglasses pushed up in her hair, looking around the resort like she was already deciding what she wanted changed first. Trent told the staff he was only there to help protect the property during a sensitive period. Sloane called it a transition. Neither word fooled anyone. Within 48 hours, they had started remaking the place in ways that felt small on paper and devastating in real life. They cut hours for longtime employees and brought in outside consultants who knew nothing about the resort but everything about making loyal people feel disposable. They canceled a local art market my grandfather hosted every month because it did not fit the image they wanted to project. They raised room rates just enough to irritate repeat guests while quietly adding new fees that made the place feel less welcoming overnight. They suspended the beach bonfire packages, paused the paddleboard partnerships, and started talking about restructuring underperforming amenities, like every warm, local human part of Horizon Cove was just excess weight they planned to strip away. Sloane was worse in person than she had ever been at a distance. She drifted through the property with a smug little efficiency that made everything feel more insulting. She asked sharp questions in front of staff she knew I could not answer quickly enough, then wrote notes on her tablet like she was documenting my incompetence in real time. At one point, she looked at the wedding lawn, then at me, and said the place had been running on nostalgia for years. She said sentiment was expensive and serious people knew when to replace it with profit. I wanted to tell her that was exactly why my grandfather never trusted people like her near this resort. But I had learned by then that anger was what they wanted from me. They needed me emotional. They needed me impulsive. They needed every witness to this mess to walk away, thinking maybe I really was too young to handle it. So I stayed calm. I listened. I took notes. I watched every change they made and every person they leaned on. Evelyn did the same. We started documenting everything: the staffing cuts, the vendor substitutions, the complaints from returning guests, the canceled community events, the sudden shift in tone from a place built on loyalty to a place being run like a property flip. The cruelest part was that they were damaging the resort while acting like they were saving it from me. That was the strategy. Create disorder, blame me for the instability, then step in as the adults with solutions. One of our longtime housekeepers cried in the laundry room after being told her schedule would be reviewed by people who had been on the property for less than a day. A repeat guest stopped me near the front desk and asked if Horizon Cove had been sold because it no longer felt like itself. Even the air seemed different, tighter, less alive. I walked the property that evening feeling like I was watching someone repaint my grandfather's memory over in cheaper colors. I had never understood until then how theft could happen in public without anyone breaking a lock. When I got back to the office, Miles called. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it I had not heard before. He asked me if Trent had begun asserting operational control yet. I told him he already had. There was a pause, and then Miles said, "Good. The clause has been triggered." For a second, I did not speak. I just stared at the desk in front of me, at the stack of complaints, schedules, and handwritten notes Evelyn and I had already begun collecting. Miles explained that my grandfather had anticipated exactly this kind of move. The moment Trent used legal pressure to interfere with my control and began inserting himself into the management of Horizon Cove, the sealed protective file was authorized to open. Not in theory, not eventually. Now. Everything my grandfather had gathered, every record tied to the Tampa scheme, every financial trail, every internal memo, every name he had quietly preserved in case this day ever came, was moving into the next phase. I could hear the ocean outside through the office window, steady and indifferent, while inside me something shifted into place just as firmly. They thought they had won because they got a judge to let them put a hand on the wheel. They thought this was the part where I panicked, broke down, and signed whatever would make the pressure stop. What they did not understand was that my grandfather had never designed this as a warning. He designed it as a trap. And the moment Trent stepped into my resort pretending to save it from me, he walked straight into it. The morning after Miles told me the clause had been triggered, I stopped feeling like I was just trying to survive and started understanding that my grandfather had left me something far more useful than money. He had left me time, structure, and a way to fight back without losing my head. Miles came down to Key West that afternoon with a forensic accountant and two thick binders from the estate file. Until then, Tampa had just been a word that made my mother go quiet. Now it turned into a pattern with dates, names, shell companies, false investor summaries, and pressure campaigns aimed at waterfront owners who had been cornered into selling. My grandfather had not built a dramatic revenge fantasy. He had documented a business model. He had seen how Trent operated, and instead of confronting him too early, he had preserved enough to expose him when he repeated himself. The problem was that old evidence alone would not be enough. If we wanted federal investigators to move fast, we needed to show that the same playbook was happening again right now at Horizon Cove. So that became my job. While Trent and Sloan kept acting like they had already taken over, Evelyn and I started building a timeline. We logged every staffing cut, every canceled event, every vendor pushed aside, every sudden policy shift that made no sense unless the goal was to strip the place of its identity and make me look incompetent. Then we moved beyond the resort itself. Toby Granger gave us a written statement about the men who came into his beach cafe talking about a future management transition and encouraging him to get out early. Nina Ellis forwarded the fake environmental email and let us copy the metadata. A charter boat captain at the marina admitted someone had hinted his docking agreement might become more difficult if he stayed too close to Horizon Cove. One by one, the stories lined up so neatly with the Tampa file that even hearing them started to make me angry in a different way. This was not improvisation. This was habit. Sloan turned out to be less careful than her father. She liked involvement too much. She wanted credit. A few of the threatening emails sent to local businesses had been routed through a consulting domain tied to one of Trent's side companies, but one message had been drafted from an internal account that briefly exposed her name in the reply path. It was not a full confession, but it was enough to show she was not some bystander standing beside her father in pretty clothes. She was in it. She was helping him lean on people who had nothing to do with our family, except the bad luck of living and working near a valuable piece of coastline. That hit me harder than I expected. I could understand greed. I could even understand Trent, convincing himself he deserved control. But there was something especially ugly about watching Sloan enjoy it. She seemed to like the humiliation part. She liked asking nervous employees loaded questions in front of other people. She liked speaking to local business owners in that polished, patronizing tone that made threats sound like market advice. She liked acting as if everyone around her should be grateful to be absorbed into something bigger. By that point, I was done waiting for decency from either of them. Miles warned me not to do anything reckless, but he also understood something about the moment we were in. Facts mattered. Records mattered. But stories traveled faster than binders. So I did something Trent would never have expected me to do. I put on a plain white shirt, stood on the beach just before sunset with Horizon Cove behind me, and recorded a video on my phone. I did not cry. I did not rant. I did not beg for sympathy. I just told the truth as clearly as I could. I said my grandfather had left me the resort. I said members of my own family had immediately tried to take control of it. I said local businesses were being pressured, my staff were being intimidated, and a sealed protection clause in my grandfather's estate had now been triggered because the very interference he feared was happening in real time. I never said more than I could prove. That was the point. I wanted every sentence to survive scrutiny. Evelyn posted the video to the resort's accounts, and one of our former wedding coordinators shared it before bed. By the next morning, it was moving faster than anything I had ever been part of. At first, it stayed local. People in the Keys recognized the property. Hospitality workers recognized the pattern. Then bigger Florida accounts picked it up because the story had everything the internet loves: family betrayal, old money, a dead grandfather who saw it coming, and a young woman refusing to get shoved out quietly. But what mattered more than the views was what came with them. Former employees from one of Trent's older projects started reaching out privately. A man from Tampa said he had seen the same buyout pressure wrapped in fake concern. A retired bookkeeper claimed she had flagged inconsistencies in a development fund years ago and been pushed out right after. None of it was enough by itself, but together it did exactly what my grandfather probably hoped it would do. It forced daylight onto a pattern Trent had always counted on keeping fragmented. He was furious by noon. I knew because he came storming into the resort office without his usual smile, demanding to know whether I was trying to defame him. Sloane followed right behind him, cold and sharp, saying I had just made a legal situation much worse for myself. For the first time since this started, I did not feel cornered when they were standing in front of me. I felt ready. I told Trent that truth was only defamation if it was false, and that if he was so confident in his version of events, he should have no problem with investigators looking closely at his business history. That landed. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened before he looked away. Men like Trent can fake calm when they think they are controlling the script. What they cannot fake is that split second when they realize the script is gone. After they left, Miles called again. The forensic team had finished cross-referencing the new material with the old Tampa file, and the overlap was strong enough that the federal contact in the estate memorandum had agreed to review the package immediately. He did not promise miracles. He did not promise arrests. But for the first time, this was no longer just my word against Trent's ambition. There was a documented history, a current pressure campaign, witness statements, digital traces, and a public record growing by the hour. I walked out to the edge of the property just before dark and looked down the beach at the lights coming on one by one. Horizon Cove still felt bruised, still under pressure, still partly in the hands of people who wanted to carve it up and turn it into something colder. But the balance had shifted. Trent and Sloane thought they were watching me drown slowly enough for no one to notice. Instead, they had pushed hard enough to wake up every mechanism my grandfather left behind. And standing there with the wind coming off the water and my phone buzzing again with messages from strangers, reporters, and locals who had begun to understand what was happening, I realized something that gave me more strength than anger ever could. They were no longer hunting quietly. They were exposed. Once my video spread beyond Key West, things moved faster than Trent could control. What started as a family fight over Horizon Cove quickly turned into something much bigger. Reporters picked up the story, investors started asking questions, and people began connecting the pressure campaign around my resort to the old Tampa files my grandfather had preserved. Trent stopped looking like a polished businessman trying to protect a valuable property and started looking like exactly what my grandfather had always believed he was. The more attention the story got, the more his world started closing in. Business partners backed away. Investors went quiet. People who had once trusted his image no longer wanted their names anywhere near him. Then federal investigators moved. With the estate file, the witness statements from local business owners, the fake emails, and the digital trail tied to Sloane, they had enough to act. Agents searched Trent's Miami office, seized financial records and computers, and found the same pattern my grandfather had warned about. Shell companies, hidden transfers, and internal communications that made it clear this was not just about me or my resort. It was a business model. Sloane was pulled in too, and suddenly she was not standing beside her father acting superior in my lobby anymore. She was being questioned as part of the same scheme. Trent tried to flee to the Bahamas, but federal agents stopped him at the airport before he could leave. Once the investigation became public, the court moved quickly. The temporary order over Horizon Cove was overturned, Trent's company was removed from the property, and full control was returned to me. Walking back through the resort after that felt completely different. The staff looked relieved. The local businesses that had been pressured started reaching out again. For the first time since my grandfather died, Horizon Cove felt like it could breathe. And standing there with the ocean in front of me, I realized something simple. Trent and Sloane thought they were fighting for a resort. They never understood they were really walking straight into a trap my grandfather had set long before either of them made their move. By the time the case was finished, Trent Hale had lost far more than the resort he tried to steal from me. Federal prosecutors did not treat what he had done like some messy family dispute or an aggressive business misunderstanding. They treated it for what it was: a pattern of fraud, coercion, and financial deception that had stretched across multiple properties and multiple victims. The evidence from Tampa, the pressure campaign around Horizon Cove, the shell companies, the fake communications, and the hidden transfers all painted the same picture. He had built an entire career on making vulnerable people feel cornered, then stepping in like a savior while quietly arranging their defeat. This time, he had picked the wrong family to do it to. He was convicted on fraud and conspiracy charges, ordered to pay millions in restitution, and sent to prison with what was left of his reputation collapsing long before the sentence was even announced. The investors who once lined up to shake his hand vanished. The banks that had once taken his calls stopped returning them. In the Florida real estate world, his name became something people used as a warning, not an introduction. Sloan did not escape the wreckage either. The emails, the intimidation tactics, and the links to the fake pressure campaign pulled her down right beside him. She was charged for her role in the scheme, publicly exposed, and forced to watch the polished image she had worked so hard to maintain fall apart in front of everyone she used to look down on. For people like Trent and Sloan, prison was only part of the punishment. The deeper wound was this: they had spent weeks acting like Horizon Cove already belonged to them, and in the end, they lost not only the resort, but the status, influence, and power they thought would always protect them. They reached for everything and ended up with nothing. A few weeks after control of the resort was fully restored to me, my mother came to Key West and asked if I would meet her at a small cafe near the marina. She looked older than I remembered, not because of time, but because denial had finally stopped carrying her. She cried almost as soon as she sat down, but this time I did not hear excuses hiding behind the tears. She admitted she had ignored what was right in front of her because it felt easier than facing the truth. She admitted that by the time she realized how far Trent was willing to go, she had already let too much happen. She said she was sorry for choosing comfort over courage and for failing me when I most needed someone to stand beside me. I did not forgive her in one dramatic moment, and I did not pretend everything could be repaired with a single apology. But I listened. That was the beginning. Not a clean reunion, not some perfect healing, just the beginning of something more honest than what we had before. We started meeting once a week after that, slowly, carefully, without pretending the past had not happened. As for Horizon Cove, I rebuilt it the way my grandfather would have wanted. I brought back the local partnerships Trent had tried to push out. Toby's Cafe started supplying breakfast again. Nina's paddleboard shop returned as one of our featured guest activities. We reopened the community art market, brought back the beach bonfire nights, and started hosting coastal cleanup events with local schools and volunteer groups. I hired people who understood hospitality as something more than numbers on a spreadsheet. I invested in the staff who had stayed loyal when everything was uncertain. Little by little, the place stopped feeling like a prize people had fought over and started feeling like what it had always been meant to be: a place where people could come, breathe, celebrate, and belong. That was when I finally understood the real value of what my grandfather left me. It was never just $30 million in beachfront property. It was judgment, preparation, protection. It was the reminder that love is not blind, and real love does not hand you something precious without also teaching you how to defend it. If this story taught me anything, it is that the most dangerous people are often the ones who call their greed concern and their control help. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no, even when the people trying to take from you share your last name. My grandfather did leave me a resort, but the greater gift was the lesson behind it. Protect what matters, pay attention to patterns, and never let guilt talk you into surrendering what was entrusted to you. At Revenge Argonne, our team works hard to create meaningful and engaging fictional stories that entertain while also sharing valuable life lessons. We are committed to telling fictional stories designed to deliver educational messages, thoughtful insights, and positive values to our viewers. Trent and Sloane were the kind of villains who hid greed behind polished words and fake concern, which made their betrayal even more disturbing. They did not just want control of the resort. They wanted to break Sadie's confidence, so she would hand it over herself. After hearing this story, how would you deal with villains like them if you were in Sadie's place?